Hey there, my name's Mark McCartney and welcome to the What is a Good Life podcast. Over the last 3 years, I've interviewed over 200 people around this question, not to prescribe you with the universal answer, but to help you to find and define your own answer to this question. I'm hoping the guests' explorations, musings, curiosities, and lines of inquiries will prompt your own investigation into what this question means for you. While I'm also trying to share with you what I perceive to be more genuine expressions of the human experience and indeed meaningful conversations. Which brings us to this week and the 73rd episode of the What is a Good Life podcast, and I'm delighted to introduce our guest, Sunil Malhotra. Sunil is someone who weaves Vedic wisdom with the innovations of tomorrow. To unravel the mysteries of the human experience, he stands at the intersection of spirituality, technology, and design. Sunil is an author whose latest book, YOGAi, Interplays of Yoga and Artificial Intelligence, demystifies both technologies in a bid to connect them in the context of the exponential times we are witnessing. He is also the founder of Ideafarms, a design and tech advisory and consulting firm. In this illuminating conversation, Sunil shares his experience of letting go of questions and answers, feeling and experiencing a much wider sense of life, and consequently recognizing that a flow has emerged that he had previously not known existed. He explains how through his latest book he forged profound connections with some of the most esteemed minds in spirituality and science, including luminaries such as Dr. Karan Singh, Ervin Laszlo, and Satish Kumar. We also discuss the capacity to look at life with fresh eyes, think for ourselves, and recognize how everything around us is communicating with us. If you're overthinking life and sense that you're holding on too tightly, this conversation will offer you plenty of suggestions, anecdotes, and clues on how life can flow more effortlessly. Look, I enjoyed this conversation immensely with Sunil, and I think his life and story is an example of the profound changes that are possible and the difference we can feel in our experience of life if we're willing to let go of our preconceived ideas of what life is. And so I'm sure you're going to take a lot from this episode. And if you enjoy this conversation, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're on the podcasting platforms, please continue to leave your reviews, as I greatly appreciate your support at this stage of my podcasting journey. And if you'd like to check out Sunil's latest book or indeed his company, please check out the notes below, as well as for ways to contact me regarding individual coaching, executive group coaching, or indeed executive retreats that I'll be organizing later this year. Please also check out the podcast newsletter where you can find my own reflections and thoughts that have been inspired by the conversations that you're listening to. And that's all from me this week. I look forward to carrying on the conversation with you next week. And so without further ado, the 73rd episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. Sunil, thank you so much for joining me today on the What is a Good Life podcast. After being made aware of your work by a good friend of mine, I've been very much looking forward and intrigued to see how this conversation goes today.
Thanks, Mark, for having me. I don't do this very often, but for some reason, when you reached out, I thought that this might be a good idea to just have a chat and see where it goes. Thanks a lot.
So with that in mind, the first question that I always ask is the question of, is there a question you're trying to answer as you move through life?
I can answer that in two ways. There used to be questions that I was wanting to answer in life. I don't think I did a great job in either asking the question or answering it.
Right.
And then and now I feel that probably there are no questions to ask. It's just about enjoying every moment of your life the way you go through it, and questions actually come in the way.
Right.
So that's the way I've gone through a short part of the last few years. And when I wrote this book that you see here, Yogai, uh, I don't know if it's making any sense to you or to anybody else, but after a while the book started writing itself, and that gave me a sense of growth and actually proved to me that there's no point asking questions, right? Just flow with it, and you have all your answers, and they're all within you, and they keep coming to you. And as long as you can flow with life, you find that the limited mind that gets in your way all the time, that kind of slowly starts moving back, and when it recedes, it's there just to help you and not run your life for you.
How would you how would you kind of even explain the development or the shift from asking questions, maybe not even asking the best questions as you're referring to what you've just said there in terms of a book writing itself or a flow in life?
That's a very, very interesting. Actually, you made me go a little further back in my life. So I used to do a lot of work in the design thinking space. I was one of the few people, or our company, Ideafarms, was one of the companies that came into design thinking less from theory and more from practice. And our opening statement in those workshops, my personal opening statement was that we've grown up in a world of answers. And I would say that, and also, we've grown up also in a world of right answers. Now, right answers is not really a very interesting way of going through life, because what then happens is that you don't learn anything more. Once you have a right answer, then you don't want to learn anything more. And that worked really well in the workshopping space, where we would say, well, from right answers, you need to be able to get to good questions, right? So when we got to that point, I felt, good questions, right answers, they're both actually, concepts in the mind. And that shift really doesn't let you off the hook, so to speak. What tends to happen is that you kind of pivot from one space to the other, but they're both the same, two sides of the same coin. And so, I guess what tended to happen was I started seeing this whole thing about, when you ask a question, you get an answer, whether it's a right answer or it's an emergent answer, or it's something that comes to your mind at that point of time. I found that every time something came to me where I was not making the effort, it was a lot easier. And the answer was much richer, because I wasn't limiting, I wasn't limiting. It's typically, okay, let me give you a very quick analogy for this. When you go out with a questionnaire or a survey or a poll, you're actually looking for someone or some number or some statistic to validate what you're already thinking,
Yeah.
right? And if you do away with those tools, then you tend to listen to the other person, when any other people that you're talking to. And what tends to happen is that you start eliciting stories. And stories are very interesting because they have an emotional component, and also they have insights which are embedded in them, which you can actually, some of those insights you can actually perceive or see, right? And so when you put all of this together, what I suddenly realized was that, well, there's no point asking questions, looking for answers, nothing. They're all there. It's kind of like you have an antenna. When you need something, the universe is very kind. It gives you what you need at that point of time.
With regards to this is I love the idea of just the limitations that we impose upon any kind of inquiry when we have even a fixed question around it. Because it almost puts on a funnel to which we filter the information, or that we're observing the information through. This sense then of just almost listening. It almost seems like we're listening to life more than or noticing life more, or something along that line, than trying to define what life is. It seems like there's an engagement with life that feels very different from the way you're describing how you've perhaps, or even growing up in a society or a cultures where we're used to knowing what the answer is almost before we begin, or looking to prove that the answer that we already hold is correct.
Yes. So it is interesting. I think the word that comes to me right now is um, experiencing
Yeah.
life. And experiencing is a combination of many other words. And when you're there in the moment and you're experiencing something good or bad, I mean, that's the other thing that I've realized through the last 2 or 3 years of writing this book and researching and talking to people, that the experience that you get out of being present is very different from something that you're kind of planning ahead or looking back into the past.
With you, the experience of writing this book, and then this sense that the book was writing itself, Could you just kind of elaborate on that sense or that experience? Because I think that's a really beautiful sentiment.
I'm a little scared to go there, because then again I see that I'm getting rational about it and logical about it,
Yeah.
trying to structure my answer. Uh, a little scared going there. Anyway, so let me see if I can, without it sounding too mystical or too nonsensical, let me see if I can. I'll try and make a connect with my design life. I don't know if you know, but my background is engineering and then industrial design.
Yeah.
So in the beginning of when you're a young rookie designer, then all you want to do is to prove that you have the skills that you've learned in school to be able to create something. And the first time you have a product out into in the market that you've designed, it's I think it's being a parent. I realize that that's even more satisfying than becoming a parent, right? Because you've done it all on your own. There's all these things that are going on in your head, and you create a product. And then very soon you realize that everything that you're doing to the next product and the next product that you get to design, you're kind of imposing your ideas onto the product, right? Well, you do need an understanding of what materials you're using, who the user is, what the market is going to look like, what is the personality that you want to shape, etc., etc. But then very soon, after you've had a certain amount of success, or you believe that you've been able to prove uh, something to yourself, there is a tendency you slip into creating your own style, which is also a great thing. I mean, if you can be recognized, if your style can be seen in the market in a product that you've designed, it's a great feeling. But then you start to wonder, is that what design is about? Or is design about the fact that it should be as invisible as possible? You actually come to a stage like that. And so I've had the good fortune of having actually designed a product which I shaped in the beginning. And then every time I would look at when we started crafting it, making models and making prototypes and whatever, I actually found the product was talking back to me. Do this to me. Don't do this to me. Something like that. It's crazy. I mean, it's a very crazy way of looking at it. But that's what it did. And Mark, you have to believe me. I don't know if that product was all that great. I don't know if it was highly successful in the market. None of that stuff, right? But it's almost like you gave birth to something inanimate, right? Because it actually grew like from an embryo into something, and you watched the whole process. And I really felt that was a very it was a very amazing experience. And then I kind of forgot about it, because I moved on from product design to strategic design to design thinking to uh, actually running a company that was doing design entrepreneurship and design in tech, basically. So when I got to writing this book, that epiphany again hit me. When I was starting to write there was a plan. I'm writing this book because there is this whole exponential technology wave that's happening, and it's going up and up and up, and there's no way that you can control it. And by the way, for no reason, people are getting very scared about what's happening and how they're going to be able to keep up with it or control it. And then I realized that, and COVID actually, and I think you heard that even in the talk that I gave. During COVID, I found that instead of technology, uh, which actually is supposed to improve lives and make lives easier, etc., after a certain point, it started making people more and more anxious. See, you get the best of everything. You get technology, you're sitting at home, you can wear shorts, you can attend a meeting, you don't need to drive and get stuck in traffic, none of that, right? So why aren't you happy? What's this whole gig about get into doing something, and then that's what you were fighting for when you were in a traditional employment or in a company scenario, and now you have the best of it, and guess what? You're getting more and more anxious. What's going on here? And what struck me was that that's because we've never been taught how to think for ourselves, not to the extent that we think to the extent of asking the kind of questions or getting the kind of questions to us which really matter in life, which ought not to be stuff that you do when you're getting old and getting close to the grave, but that's something that you should go on with life. And that's what got me into looking at yoga very carefully. And very quickly I realized, and this is where the I think the shift happened. Where I looked at yoga, when I started, it was yoga the way almost everybody understands it, right? So let me quickly ask you, what is your understanding of yoga?
Straight away, the first thing that comes to mind is flexibility, breath work, or control of breath, but presence in the moment. And for me, there'd be some aspect of connection, whether that's beyond myself. I could call it divine, I could call it something like that, but contain kind of clearing the way for an appreciation or awareness of something more subtle than I might typically consider in life.
So, Mark, you're pretty evolved, I would say, much more evolved than I was at that time, right? So,
Okay.
I kind of missed the last point, right? Although I knew I come from India, I lived in India. I mean, yoga is around me all the time. You just can't miss yoga if you live in India, right?
Yeah, I've
And
I've visited it a few times, so I'm very very aware of that as well. Yeah.
but and we know and we are told, not directly through yoga but through all our customs and our cultural orientations, etc. We are told about the path of liberation and stuff like that. But somehow, because we are also western in our thought process, we are educated in a western paradigm, etc., what tends to happen is we don't see the connection. And that's when the book started writing itself, because when I started looking at yoga, I came across Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. I looked at that. I found the very first thing I read in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras was that there's no point doing any of the asanas, which is your postures, or pranayam, which is breath control, or even meditation, which is dhyan. They use the word dhyan, without having moral restraints, or things that you are supposed to do before you can get into these practices. And I said, wow. So that means these are practices that come after you have taken a call that you want to live a moral and ethical life. And so then when I started researching, I found this connection of a very strong, we would see it all across the internet. I met Dr. Karan Singh. I had the opportunity to meet several of these people. And what I started realizing was that yoga, the final frontier of yoga, yoga, by the way, it's comes from a Sanskrit word yuj, and there is an English word called yoke, Y-O-K-E. Yoke means to attach or to connect to something, and yuj means union. In a sense, both mean the same thing. And that's when it struck me that what I was going down for the yoga and AI part of it, which are basically both proxies, yoga for spirituality and AI for exponential technologies. That's when the book started writing itself, because it then started pointing me in directions which I had not started with. And I think that's what enriched me through the writing process of the book, which took me a long time. I mean, I realized that I needed, if I wanted to do any kind of justice to the book, it wasn't a book that I would be able to research and get done in about 6 or 7 months. Although that was my initial target. I said, timing wise, it makes no sense for me to write this book, start writing the book in 2020 and not have it out before 2024. If someone had told me that, I would have given up right away, you know.
Yeah, that reminds me of some of my own ventures as well. If somebody had told me how long it would take me before I started, I probably wouldn't have began. This,
Right.
but this is I love this idea, even though when you're designing, back in your designing days, of that the product was talking to you. Um, and I do want to go into some of what you've said just around the book as well. But just this, even then, this sense of that the book was guiding you in directions, or once you started or once you engaged with the process in some way, then it was almost it itself was instructing you. What do you perceive that as? Because, and I'm my mind is very open to like lots of different interpretations of even realities. Even if I look at things through a spiritual, quantum physics lens, lots of different things. I just think that there's so much, or even a mystical lens. I think there's so much we don't understand What for you is that sense of something potentially talking to you? Because I really love the sense of that we're in communication with everything. Um, I'm just really intrigued as to what you would say to a product or even a book was informing you of something that you know describe as inanimate to some degree, but then there seems to be an aliveness to it, right?
So, well, this is you're taking me into a space that I never imagined I would go, but it's thank you for it. It's
Okay.
very beautiful that you asked this, because it gets me back into answering a question which gives me much more knowledge than you and other people. So imagine we you and I are communicating. I think to some extent because we are using a common language which is English and we are speaking to each other. My sense is that about 80% of the communication is understood on both sides. I don't think the remaining 20% actually happens, but that doesn't really matter because we are getting across to each other. Now you can do that with the verbal language because we use it all the time, right? And we use it because it's a survival guide for us. We cannot, I mean, without language, just imagine if you and I kept quiet for the next 20 minutes, we just wouldn't know what's going on unless you were at a mystical connection where you just sat and you could sense the silence and the silence could speak to both of us and we would both pick up whatever we wanted to. Now that's a very esoteric, mystical, very in a traditional sense is the craziest thing that anyone can think of because they would ask me, Sunil, this morning you woke up, what did you smoke? That's what they would tell me, right? And so coming back to that question, the every product, every object, every inanimate object, every living object actually communicates, just not in English, just not in verbal language. And I'll tell you how that is. Just let's do a quick thought experiment. You want to buy yourself a pair of trousers, right? And you walk into a store. There is a zillion categories, zillion colors, zillion styles that you see there. The only thing that you have in your head, which is common to everybody else, is your size, right? The color is a preference. Your feel of the material is a preference. Everything else is a preference. So obviously, the one that you pick or the ones that you go through are all talking to you, right? If they weren't talking to you, there was no way you would pick any of them up. And so every product actually speaks to us. It's just that it speaks in a language that we don't believe that it's speaking to us. When you go past when you let go of the fact that, it's like you said just now, there are things that your mind or your brain can process and let you know, which are the five senses and whatever you're talking about, right? And we become prisoners of that. We just don't let go of it. Some of us don't even believe that there could be anything beyond the brain. But those of us who can see even a little beyond the brain know that we feel intuition, we feel a sixth sense, and there are yet others who see things and we look at them and say, these guys must be crazy, right? And so I think if we were a little open to looking around, again, coming back to the fact that you're experiencing your life and the world around you to the maximum extent that you can, you'll find everything speaks to you. Everything. Some people like trees, some people like animals. What's happening there? They're speaking to you in a language that's not been codified yet, that's not been accepted between us. That's about it.
This is I really like that way of capturing it because and that feels very like that resonates a lot with my experience of life. I think the essence of life sometimes, or even as you mentioned, in silences. Like I run conversations that can involve 20-minute up to 45-minute silences, and I think it's really interesting to notice the subtlety of even just to have the space to be aware of what you're projecting onto whatever it is that you're engaging with. Even just to have that bit of awareness in any kind of engagement is fascinating as well. For you, then, you were mentioning, look, yoga has been ubiquitous in your life. It's been everywhere, but you took a really keen interest or exploration in it over the previous few years. What was that? What was the initial inclination to explore it at this point in life?
So there was no inclination primarily from within at that point of time. It was more because, uh, I was also going through a slight setback in the business that we were doing, because not just because of COVID, but because we'd had an unpleasant experience with one of our largest clients, and that kind of shook everything. Anyway, when I was shaking that off, COVID happened, right? And when I looked at COVID and these epiphanies came to me. By the way, I have been involved with a very, what can I call it? It's a beautiful ecosystem called the EXO community, Exponential Organization Community, run by, it was founded by Salim Ismail, who was the first director of Singularity University in California. And so the exponential technology side and design thinking, they have a very close linkage. So I was already in that space, and I was trying to see, how do I move out of the doing stuff, and I was actually doing workshops, right? And I was actually working with companies and trying to get them to, the pitch was very interesting. The pitch was that, nobody can deny that Apple's products are the best, right? Whether in every form or shape, and that's why they've got. And they're not, by no means are they cheap or uh, uh, easy to procure or whatever. But once an Apple fan, you're always an Apple fan. And I used to tell them that, Steve Jobs is known for having created Apple, and I think even after he's gone, it's that legacy, it's that spirit, that kind of thinking that's taking Apple forward. And oh, by the way, you had lots of artists and designers and people like that. None of them have been able to prove the commercial success that Apple has had, and that shows the power of design as something that can be commercially highly successful. So Apple becoming, uh, valued at the combined, more than the combined market cap of Google and Facebook. I think last year or something, beginning of last year. So I said, guess what? I can, or we can work together with you. And I know that we will never be able to create a Steve Jobs within your company. But guess what? As a group, using the power of design thinking, you can learn to design like Apple, which is a great pitch. I mean, it really had a great hook, and you're able to take this forward. So when COVID happened, and I got this epiphany that we need to get people to understand themselves, because that's the only way they're going to get over the anxiety, etc., and also be able to manage the trajectory of exponential technologies. So then the idea that came to me was, I'll explain this to you. I don't know if it'll make any sense or not. What came to me immediately was that there is an external world, and we have a physical body mind complex which has the senses necessary to be able to perceive and manage the inputs or the stimulus that come from the external world. But there is an internal part of us, and we have no means to, traverse that trajectory. How do we get there to figure out who we are? Or are we just, mechanical beings that are looking outside? And that's when the yoga clicked into my mind, to saying that, okay, the yoga is one of the things where they speak of meditation, and you can sit down and get to know yourself and feel yourself, etc. And what struck me was that for time on end, there's always been this dichotomy between inside outside. For time on end, there's always been this question about spirituality versus science. For time on end, there's been this tussle between Eastern and Western thought processes. One is scientific, the other is spiritual, etc., etc. So I said, guess what? Where does this actually intersect? And the aha moment came. It intersects at the human being, nowhere else. And if it intersects at the human being, it's a worthwhile exploration to get these two together, simply to be able to communicate what I've figured out, or what has come to me, with the rest of the world. And that was all that I wanted to do with the book. To say, hey, you know what, this is what I figured. Let me just get you to a point where each of these doesn't become something that you need to, struggle with, because they're both within your control.
And for you, then, what was the when you were exploring the connection, or even just exploring the almost these poles that in the way they're perceived, like, as you say, this kind of scientific versus spiritual, all of this, like, what was your what was the sense for you when you started to bring both of these under the same kind of curiosity, or the same exploration, or your writings? What was starting to appear to you that was surprising you, or that felt very natural, or that felt unseen, perhaps, and as you were exploring it yourself?
I started it started unraveling actually for me. So when I was looking at yoga, I started off by saying, okay, this is mystical stuff, we need some practices, um, but they need to be simple practices because they need to be contextual, relevant, relatable to people. I mean, it's been around for 5,000 years. Why hasn't it actually taken root? So my thing was that how do I make it as simple as possible to understand, and not give it as a prescriptive, capsule that you can start with, but show pointers. And then when I said, okay, if I'm going to look for pointers, I also need to validate those pointers. And what started happening was that when I started digging into the yoga side of things, and thankfully, and see, here's the very beautiful thing between yoga and artificial intelligence as exponential technologies. None of this exploration or the writing of a book which had these elements of yoga that I have been able to capture could have happened without the internet or without Google or without the exponential technologies that I've used, right? I mean, if I had to go to a library or go and speak to people, this happened in 3 years. It would have taken 30 years, and I wouldn't have come close to what I've been able to do. So see the power that technology can give to something that's 5,000 years old, and this is just emerging. But then what was very surprising, I guess I'd seen pieces of it, but I didn't imagine it would be to that level. I found that some of the greatest scientists and thinkers of the West have spoken about Vedanta, yoga, spirituality, and validated it way back, in the beginning of the 20th century, even before that. And that was very surprising because I said, imagine that these people are there, but these are, dots, blips somewhere, and nobody actually it's not made an impact on society. So that got me thinking, saying that, if these guys like Nikolai Tesla, right, and if you look at poets like Emerson, people like Wittgenstein, just imagine Niels Bohr, Max Planck. Imagine that it's all European, American, English scientists, neuroscientists, quantum
Yeah,
physicists.
David Bohm as well.
Yes, and David Bohm, Carl Sagan, of all people, I mean, one of the most popular people. When he spoke about the Hindu religion, I said, wow, I've been sitting on it. These guys in the West have known so much more about it. They've written about it. They believe so much more than I do. And so that became very, very fascinating. And so one thing led to another, and I was able to get so much of information that I said, you know what, I'm going to write the book like this now. I'm not going to give people everything because it's difficult for anybody to eat a complete buffet in one go, right? So just lay it out for everybody and let them pick the pieces that they want. And I hope that this book actually becomes a starting point for anybody to pick up what resonates with them and for them to move forward from there, because I've given references in the footnotes and whatever. And a similar thing happened on the AI side of things. So when I started looking into the AI perspective, already I think I've made the connection already. But when you start looking there and you start seeing that 2022, I think the Nobel Prize for Physics goes to three scientists who are proving spooky action at a distance, what Einstein called spooky action at a distance, which is these two particles that are quantum entangled without any connection. They're I mean, they're light years away, and you do something to one and the other. The yogis have known this for a long, long time. I'm not saying that the yogis knew quantum physics, but the resonance is, and the coincidence is unbelievable. And it's so unbelievable that it must be true.
Yeah, I it's funny you say that, because I once read the book, the autobiography of a yogi by Yogananda, and just when you mentioned Steve Jobs, apparently
Yes.
that was the one book that he at his funeral that he gifted everyone. Um,
Yes.
and then just hearing of different things in quantum physics space, like where I read as a layman, like whether it's Carlo Rovelli or Richard Feynman or different books like this, or David Bohm, and there is just something. I'm not well versed enough to reference it with credibility, but there's even bilocation of a master's physical presence, or even just bilocation in quantum physics or entanglement of all of these things. They're just, without me being able to describe it, it feels very resonant. There's it seems like some very evolved people are pointing to the same thing, but as you kind of pointed to earlier, maybe in a different language. But I don't know. It feels very pertinent to me.
So this is what I was having a chat with somebody. In fact, the last 2 or 3 days have been very fascinating because somehow, when people meet me now, I mean, these are friends and people, acquaintances that I know. When they somehow, a guy who's written a book, an author of a book, is presumed to have all the answers, right? So, so I'm asked questions like, so what do you think spirituality is? You know, and do you think there is an afterlife? I don't believe in reincarnation, etc., etc. So now I've realized that I have to answer these questions with the first part of answering the question is the disclaimer that I'm no authority on any of this stuff, neither AI nor
Yeah.
spirituality, right? But since you're asking me the question, I can only point you to something that I think I found, and it's in the book. And what you just said, that's one of the things that I tell them, saying that there's a difference between knowledge and knowing. Knowledge you can gather from outside, you can pick it up, you can package it, you can consume it. But there's some parts of yourself which constitute knowing, which you can't even explain to yourself. And so the resonance that you're talking about, that happens with every human being, depending on, and I believe that there may be a difference in stages of evolution or conditioning or something like that. Even that I'm a little agnostic to. I believe that everybody is at the same stage, same level. It's just a question of exposure. Because there are things that one could say today. I mean, I know that 10 years ago, if I was speaking like this and I had one of my clients listen in, they would probably tell their HR people, let's cancel the contract with Sunil. So today, at least, you have the courage to go out and talk about something like this.
But I think that's a fascinating thing. Like my background was in finance before, and I think if I had read a book in my 20s, I'm 40 now, but if I'd read a book in my 20s, it was going to be a sports autobiography most likely. Um,
Right.
and I think there's something rather incredible, like, because I think like what you're pointing to as well, I agree with. I think we all have the capacity to feel something, to sense something, for things to resonate with us, and then it's going to be such a byproduct of the people that we surround ourselves with, the cultures that we're in. And I really don't think, the way sometimes people may say, well, if someone is educated, therefore they have a certain degree of knowing. But I think there's a big difference between, as you said there, they can acquire knowledge, but you may not have a knowing. And it's always an unbelievable experience, whether it's to put yourself in a different field, a different culture, to realize how much you're holding up as truth or fact, which is only a perspective. And it's very interesting, just even in what you're describing in your journey, like just the things you're opening up to, the aliveness that you're perceiving in various things that maybe you may not or may not be commonly considered to be alive. And then also your willingness to perceive something quite differently, even as you say, 10 years ago, this would have been something quite different as to what you might have been pointing to or acknowledging.
Yes, 10 years ago, I would call it corporate blasphemy. Nothing less. How can you be talking this? We are paying you for your time. Don't give us this kind of crap. I have to tell you, since you spoke about the truth, I got this is very interesting. So there is this gentleman, a mathematician. He's a mathematician monk from the Ramakrishna Mission Order, right? And a friend of mine just sent a WhatsApp message to me saying, "Today I heard a quote from this mathematician monk. His name is, did I mention his name? Mahan Maharaj. He's called Mahan Maharaj. I don't know what his real
Okay.
name is. Truth is something that's felt and not logically arrived at." So just think about this. It's a very powerful statement he's made. It, truth, a fact you can arrive at, or you can look at and say this is a fact, right? So he makes a distinction between what we consider as truth or fact, but he says that no, don't mix up the two. Truth, which is what the knowing part is, not the knowledge part. The knowing part is something that's felt and not logically arrived at. So I thought that was a very powerful statement.
I think this is a stunning statement. And I think it's where we, as humans, even our interactions with each other, get lost sometimes. Um, because we think that so much of our interaction is based on an agreement of information rather than it can be different felt experiences, and
Yes,
your truth and my truth can coexist. They don't need to be in competition with each other as well. For your sake,
yes.
when you were, I know you've mentioned, I know even in the book you were mentioning different scientists that you've talked to or different practitioners. Like, what in your journey and how long this would have taken you without the, without the use of technology, or meeting these people and building out different research for the book, for you, like, what were some of the moments in interviewing some of these great minds? Like, what were some of the surprising moments for you, whether it was a felt experience or even if it was a nugget of information that you were like, wow, that actually that surprised me, or that's kind of shaken my view a little bit.
I think I don't think anything either surprised me, or I think these were things that I already knew. It more or less reinforced or validated what I already knew, and that made me feel vindicated to some extent. But at the same time, it also showed me that there is probably a kind of revival, you may call it, of spirituality, of a sense of sacredness, etc., etc., without any pontification. So whether it was Dr. Karan Singh that I spoke with, I mean, I've been blessed, someone like him, to have the opportunity of meeting him regularly, sitting with him for an hour, talking to him. Um, well, it's been a uniquely rewarding experience. I mean, a lot of it has probably, in some way influenced what I've written in the book. But more than that, it has embellished my personality no end because of the kind of person that he is, the kind of life experience that he has. Then Dr. Ervin Laszlo is another person.
Yeah.
You've heard of Dr. Ervin Laszlo? Yeah. So I spoke with him, I think, end of 2021, and I told him I'm trying to write this book, Yoga and AI, and he validated it right then. He said, You're doing something really important for the world. And at that time, I wasn't really convinced that I was doing something that significant. I still am not, though, right? But when he said something like that, I said, I think probably he's a gentleman and is trying to be polite with me. But then I realized as I got to know him a little bit more that he's not that kind of a person. So if he didn't need to say something like that. And that's what validated that this bit of yoga coming into the AI. One of the things that he said, and I think it's there in the book, he says that, I have great confidence in artificial intelligence. The only problem is I don't have confidence in the people that are developing it.
Yeah.
You know, so he made that kind of distinction. Then I met a gentleman called Satish Kumar. I don't know if you've heard of him. Quite an amazing gentleman. He was a monk. As a young kid, he fought. with his family and went and became a Jain monk. And then he came across Mahatma Gandhi. And then from the age of 9 to 18, he was a Jain monk. And then he came across Mahatma Gandhi and decided to leave the monkhood, which is completely a no-no. It never happens. So anyway, he slunk out one night and came out into the real world. And would you believe? So he's you've heard of ahimsa,
Yeah.
non-violence, right? Gandhi's big platform. I think he's an embodiment. Satish Kumar is an embodiment of ahimsa in today's world. He's a living legend as well. He's the founder of Schumacher College in London, near London actually, Devon, I think. And I don't exactly remember what he said, but he defined intelligence very differently from the way we understand intelligence. He brought in the word discrimination, not just smartness, but discrimination as well. And for him, discrimination is a little higher than just distinguishing. Discrimination means what's good, what's bad, and that comes from a deeper sense of understanding yourself and your place in the universe. That was also very enriching. So these kind of people, these names, I'm missing out maybe a few, but these kind of people, when you come across these people who are kind of out of reach typically, especially for someone who's in India and has been more in the design and in the technology corporate space, you don't have a chance to come in contact with such people or have any opportunity to interact with them beyond a hello, hi, I'm so and so kind of a thing. So in that sense, I think the universe was starting to do something to make sure that this book would happen, and I think I'm the beneficiary.
What? Because I've had some experiences even with doing this podcast where I'm just like, this is funny. Like I'm chatting to this person now, which I possibly would never have chatted to, or I wouldn't have seen a pathway to talking to. Um, what do you think that is? And I love the sense of the universe supporting you in this venture as well. What's your like? Is it just a big sense of gratitude you have in those moments? Are you kind of thinking like this is a bit surreal, or how would you kind of relate to those experiences?
I think you said it right. I think it's just a very deep and a very, I don't even know, an overwhelming sense of gratitude. It can't be anything else. You know, why me? Why have I been picked for something like this? And then I realized that it's not me. So one a very interesting thing came to me just a couple of days ago. I was sitting and I really see one of the things, Mark, I have to tell you is that I don't consciously focus on thinking anymore. A lot of people might get this thing that okay, he's now written the book, he must be a thinker and all of that. The good thing that's happened is that I don't think anymore. So what I think has started happening is that, in a manner of speaking, I'm tempted to say things come to me, right? But then the epiphany I had 3 or 4 days ago was that things don't come to me, they come through me. And so I'm very blessed and very grateful that that I have this. I've been. I would not even say I have been chosen. I just believe that just the awareness that things are coming through me keep me exactly where I should be, neither higher nor lower than where I should be at this point in life. I don't know if that's making sense, but I thought to me it was a very powerful moment
Yeah,
of
this
truth.
this this absolutely makes sense. The sense of I love it though as well that it's not some egoic sense of this is I've been chosen for this. This is just literally coming through me. This is there is I guess a sense of some feeling of co-creation in that process, but you're not the like it's you facilitate it rather than been a master of a destiny or something to this effect.
Also, facilitation also has an element of doership, which I'm now. I think after the last few days when this epiphany came to me, I believe that I'm not even facilitating. Think of it like this: there's a reservoir of water, right? and there's a pipe that connects the water to all the rooms, and there are faucets at the end of the room of each one of those pipes. And so, who are you? Are you the reservoir? No. Are you the faucet? Maybe yes. But I'm thinking I'm not the faucet. Also, I'm just the pipe. I have no role to play. I'm just channeling. When somebody goes and opens the faucet at the other end, how does the energy flow unless there's a pipe? So I think I'm very fortunate to be the pipe, because the more energy that flows through me, the cleaner I become.
With this sentiment and also the idea that you're, or the awareness that even you're not trying to think consciously at this point, what implications does that have in terms of how you perceive or experience life? And I know you're even saying this was a recent epiphany, um, in terms of, things coming through you. But if you step back from your life and kind of go, wow, what implications do you see that having for your experience of life?
It's like a huge load that's lifted off of me. I don't need to make any effort. And I've often said this in the past, and I think I've said it more intellectually, and today I'm saying it exactly the way I feel it. To a lot of people, I've said we give ourselves too much credit for where we are today. We just take for granted. There are so many branches that you've taken, right? And you think you've taken those branches. It's just that you're brought to a point and you take a certain route going forward. Maybe you did something in the process, but a lot of it has been outside your control, right? And you reached a certain point and you keep giving yourself so much credit. I've got a great life, I'm privileged and all of that. No, you don't have a great life. You're not privileged. You are really privileged because something brought you here, right? You can sit here and say I could have done a lot better, but guess what? You could have been a lot worse as well. It doesn't mean that you've done anything to get to where you are. So that doesn't mean that you're just being speaking like a fatalist, or you're leaving everything to destiny. So all you need to do is to now lie on your couch and smoke cigars. That's not what it is. You keep doing what you need to do, but for God's sake, don't take the entire credit for where you are today, right? And I used to say this to a lot of people. I don't think I really understood what I was saying. Again, that was coming through me, but I think I felt a slight intellectual or spiritual pride when I was saying it. Today, that's not there, right? It's just that, oh, wow, see, now I can get out of. Till now, I was standing in my way. Guess what? Now I can get out of my way because there's something else taking care of me, and I'll keep doing what I got to do. I'm not going to just sit down and now bask in past glory or waste the rest of my life. I don't know how long a life I have, right? So whatever I have, let me be present in the moment. Let the universe take me wherever I need to go. So that's where I'm at. I hope.
Do you sense then, like, is the, because it's always hard to put words to this without it becoming something intellectual then, and I love the acknowledgement that, there's so many things that we could read and then regurgitate and then proclaim our opinions, but we don't feel it. So it's a very big difference to say what you're talking about there, from having a very, almost like a deep realization or felt experience that this is coming through me, rather than just saying that, because people can say that, but their lives don't feel very different. The for you then, like, while saying that, you're still going to do what you need to do in your life, is that a sense of, like, are we, is the experience to simply notice and to pay attention, or is that even too active from your perspective? Like, because as you say, you and I, even if we said, okay, all we have to do for the rest of our life is sit on a couch, we're not just going to sit on a couch. There'll be ideas, there'll be engagements, there'll be interactions, there will be all of these things. Just from your perspective, like, do you see then, like, is there any role at all then, or is it simply awareness and paying attention, and then life will look after itself, or how would you kind of explain that experience?
So I'll tell you a story that I came across. Right, you've heard of Swami Vivekananda. He's the guy who brought
Yeah,
Hinduism to the
yeah.
West. You've heard of him? So Narendranath Datta, he's a very highly educated guy, and he was looking around for anybody who said that he had seen God. So he comes to Ramakrishna and says, "Have you seen God?" So he says, "Yes." So he says, "You actually believe that you've seen God?" He says, "Yes." "Then can you show me God?" He says, "Yes, I can show you God." And so Narendranath kept trying, 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 and he wouldn't be able to. And then one fine day he saw God, because Ramakrishna was apparently an avatar, which means a reincarnation of God Himself, right, personified. And he kind of made it happen, and Vivekananda went into that mode of what they call samadhi. He was able to. He said, "I've seen God." Then he came back to and told Ramakrishna that I may be a little off on the facts, but I mean I think it's illustrating my point. So Ramakrishna asked him, "So you've seen God?" He says, "Yes." "So what do you want to do now?" So he said, "I love it. So I'll come once in a way. I'll have a look around at the world and kind of, appreciate the wonders of God and the universe, and then I'll go back into samadhi." And Ramakrishna says, "Fie on you. That's not what you're supposed to do. Do you believe that you've seen this and now you can just sit as an individual and enjoy the bliss? I think you're made for bigger things. You should go out and tell the world what you've seen." And so Vivekananda, in the short life he had, he died before he was 40. Uh, in about 10 years, the kind of work that he's been able to do in terms of service in education, in women's welfare, in opening these missions, etc., incredible. But the difference, I guess, was that since because of his realization, he realized that I'm not doing anything. What needs to be done, I will put my best effort, put my best foot forward, and keep moving, and things will happen. Because now I am the instrument which has been chosen to do all the stuff that needs to be done, and that's what I will do. It's not that I will do one or the other; I'll do both. So I guess
Yeah.
that's an inspiration for me. I don't know where it will go. Right now, a deep sense of peace has descended upon me, and hopefully that's going to be the prime mover for the rest of my life. I don't know.
It I don't know if it's completely connected. I guess it's connected in my head just from when you were saying that. This guy was an Indian Jesuit priest born in Mumbai and then studied. He also studied some psychoanalysis and psychology as well. Anthony DeMello, and yeah,
Yeah, I've heard his name.
he
Yes.
was he saw someone who was sick and hungry on the street, and then he cried out to God. He said in a book called Song of the Bird, he cried out to God, saying, "God, why would you allow this to happen? Why would you do this?" And God responds, "Well, I sent you, didn't I?" And yeah. So
There
you
you
just
go. There
that
you
made
go.
me
Good.
think of that. Just Sunil, just really, I know we're coming up to the end here, but just from your perspective, and maybe just to share with people as well, what you were hoping to equip people, not equip people with, but to in writing this book, and I guess bringing an awareness of ourselves to the importance of knowing ourselves, and that distinction you made about the inner and outer world in terms of our engagement or adoption with AI. What was your kind of hope that someone might get from reading the book, or a sense of perspective maybe that they might sit in after engaging with the book?
So this chat has become a lot about the book. It wasn't intended, but I'm glad that it did. Um, Let me try and just quickly encapsulate
Right.
what I think this book should do. Right. So one is that I just hope that the book is not something someone buys and keeps on his bookshelf and forgets about. Right. And I have a feeling that it does have that kind of power that it will pull itself to you at some point or the other. So imagine that it's lying around on the table, right? And once in a way you just pick it up and you pick up some piece, because it's not a book that's supposed to be read in cover to cover. If you've
Yeah.
read a little bit, you know that it's got pieces in it. So first, I don't think the book can do more than just be a starting point for people, right? Just to get a sense of, hey, you know what's going on around here? Let me pick up YOGAi and figure out, has he written something in here? And it's meant to start dialogues, one with yourself and one with people around you. Whatever you pick up, it's meant to start those dialogues. There might be times where they may want, someone might want to reach out to me, and I will entertain those, because I mean, if it's coming from there, that's one of the key uh, elements of the book, is you can't put everything into a book. And therefore, if there is a provocation, if there's a question that you need to ask, by all means reach out, and I'll answer to whatever extent I can, or I'll point you in that direction. In fact, there are many places where I've quoted people verbatim, and I've put them in the footnote with a link, so that it's easy for you to not even come to me. You can just go there and continue your journey from there. So that's one part. So that's the self discovery dialogue, whatever, and kind of, boil the ocean kind of a thing. The other part, which probably doesn't come out very strongly, is the exponential technologies, artificial intelligence part. Because I said, why preach to the choir? And plus, it's very new. It's just, in the beginning, what can you write about? You can't really comprehensively write about artificial intelligence at this point of time. And there's no point getting technical about it. It's what's more important is, how do you use artificial intelligence in your own context? So, in a sense, this is just supposed to be one of those, if you remember when you were visiting Italy for the first time, you had those maps that you would pick up, from the airport, to say, hey, let me, or that book that you picked up to say, okay, if I have to go to Italy, which are the places I should see? This is virtually something like that, like a guide for your life, is what I intend it to be.
And just given everything we've talked about in this conversation, Sunil, whether it's from, you know, realizing that this book was writing itself, a sense of flow, exploring the sense of effort, also the, you know, the shift you're talking about from your own perspectives, that 10 years ago, if you're listening to yourself now, that it would seem very different. Your recent epiphanies in the sense of what's coming through you, the difference, the experience that has in life, the openness, I guess, even that you're pointing to, and in some of the interpretations of spirituality versus science, even in some of the, you know, some of the great thinkers, that they were saying a lot of the same things that you're picking up on now. The sense of gratitude that quite clearly you were experiencing even through the process of creating this. Um, just really curious, as the question that I usually finish this conversation with is, what is a good life for you?
However cliched it might sound, a good life for me is a good life for everybody. Because the way I look at it, if I have a good life, which is not such a good life for everybody around me or things around me, then it's not a very good life at the end of the day. Whereas if you flip it around, if it's a good life for everything around, then I get to also benefit from it. Okay, so it may sound a little cliched, but that's a good life for me. And what I would definitely want to, how I would like to contribute to a good life for many people, is that, I've done traditional, not traditional. I've been pretty unconventional in the route that I took till here, and I've been a few steps ahead in the markets that I've operated, which I didn't was not very happy with. I mean, it was mostly good for my ego, but not good for business, kind of a thing. But now, what I would definitely want to do is to share the good with companies, with people. Uh, I'm not so drawn to, making too much money out of it, but I definitely feel that I should be able to contribute where people of their own accord would say, hey, you know what, you deserve to take something, a piece of the pie anyway. So maybe that kind of a shift in even the engagements that I would have with my current and future clients, that's where I would like to take it. And that's an experiment. Let's try it and see. If it works, great. If it doesn't, no skin off anybody's back.
Well, hopefully, Sunil, the universe will continue to provide what you need. And this is, you know, I really enjoy this sentiment, not only of like if it's a good for everyone else, it will also be good for me. But I think that's that in itself is a profound shift in terms of, I think, how many of us are kind of programmed to perceive life first and foremost. And I think just from interviewing so many people as well, that's typically, I think, where it's found, where that when that shift is genuinely and kind of earnestly experienced. So look, Sunil, thank you so much for your time today, for all that you've shared, the experiences, your observations, and your perspectives. And I really wish you the best of luck with this book as well, and wherever this journey is taking you, as you kind of continue to notice things come through you in this life.
So I should thank you because I'm grateful that you gave me the chance to ramble along for, I don't know, over an hour, I think. Well, that's really kind of you. And thanks very much, Mark. And do keep in touch. I mean, it's actually been, I have to say this, it's been really wonderful talking to you and getting to know you and meet you.